So actually, it's not just in those simple ways that use of language is different in humans. We have very sophisticated ways of using language that can become impaired in people with language disorders. Speech therapists will often see these kinds of cases. Pragmatic language use refers to our ability to express ideas in ways that involve turn-taking in conversation. We might see in cases of patients with closed head injury that they are not able to, or someone like Phineas Gage doesn't remember to stop and wait for the interlocutor to speak. So the pragmatics of language use and conversation and discourse is impaired. We might also see the use of sarcasm. Australians are very famous for this, and it doesn't always translate well in other cultures. So Australians are very famous for using sarcasm or cynicism, and basically what that means is what they say, they mean the opposite. So sarcasm is not an easy thing to understand if you have lost the pragmatics of language, because if somebody says to you, "I don't like you anymore," an Australian might be using that in a sarcastic way, or "You're a genius." Actually, what Australians are really saying is, "You're an idiot." So the use of sarcasm is a very subtle pragmatic cue that is only found in human language, and it's not found in all languages actually. So again, unique to the human form of language is the ability to use phonology, which is a whole separate subject of study in linguistics, and morphology. And these are two distinct features of language. Phonology refers to sounds, how we use sounds, and morphology refers to how we use meaning. Now, in different languages, sound and meaning play a kind of unique role in syntax. So let's take, for example, the sounds of words such as we find in Cantonese. So sounds are fairly simple, so there's usually one syllable, but the change to the sound of a syllable using tone gives the same form, a completely different meaning. Now in morphology, in Chinese we also see something quite unique. We don't see a great deal of morphological information in spoken language. So syllables tend to be quite sticky. They don't change much. One exception to that is the use of markers, which give content to the form in unique ways. So classifiers is one example. So in Putonghua, we often hear g or d, and these are words that don't actually have any meaning on their own, but they qualify the syllable to give a change in the meaning. So morphology and phonology are quite unique in Cantonese. If we compare that to English, in Putonghua rather, if we compare that to English, the sounds of words in English are all very much bound by a different set of rules, which enable us to produce multi-syllable words, and they tend to be inflected in different ways to Chinese. So the sounds of words in English and other Indo-European languages tend to be more specific, so you don't find as many homophones, for example. So much more unique. They tend to stand for one meaning and not many others. And we also find that the morphology of words in Indo-European languages is quite different. So we've got two types of morphology in English. One is called inflected, and the other one is called derived. Now, inflected is very obvious because we use it to express tense. So the past tense would end with D, for example, something had already happened. We might use different plural forms to express number, mass versus count. So instead of one boy, there's two boys, for example. So tense and plural and number, quantity, is expressed with different inflections to give the same word, boy or happen, a different meaning. That is, morphology is changed. In the case of derived morphology, it's a little bit more interesting. It happens a lot in Germanic languages. So, for example, let's take a lot of the words we use in the jargon we use in this course. So I frequently use words that are very long and are derived from Latin or Greek or some other ancient language. Let's take an example like government or department. Now the origin of these words is Latin. So govern, which means literally to rule over, and ment means a place, a part. So government means a part or place of governing. Depart is a derivation of that. We've got a number of other examples. Perhaps one of the clearest ones, since some of you may have visited the UK, or you may know something about rugby. So a lot of places in the UK, particularly in southern England, have the word ham at the end, H-A-M. So Twickenham, Wimbledon, etc. Twickenham is a place where people play rugby, but the village of Twickenham, like most villages in southern England, have the word ham at the end, because in Saxon times the Danes who invaded the southern counties of England used the word ham to describe a small settlement. So the Saxon word for settlement was ham. So even today, all over the UK, especially in London, look at a tube map, you'll see lots and lots of names with ham, Fulham, etc. So we've got remnants of this Saxon language still in our English vocabulary, and this is what we call derived morphology. Now the same is true in Chinese, which is interesting. So new words are actually created in that way in Chinese. So Dianhua, for example, this is a relatively new word. Well, it's probably about 100 years old now, but telephone wasn't in existence 100 years ago. So in order to make a word for telephone, what the lexicographers did back in the days of inventing new Chinese words was to formally announce that telephone means electric flower, Dianhua. Why? Because the dial of an old telephone looked like a flower, and you had to put your finger in and turn the dial around. So Dianhua was the name of the telephone because it looked like an electric flower. The dial looked like an electric flower. But actually this process of compounding words, which is a type of derivation or morphology, is rife in Chinese languages. There are numerous examples. Perhaps you can think of some yourselves.